Trump was not very effective at all. And it's not just North Korea. We know from Douglas McGregor, who was personally involved with this, that Trump had the intention of withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, that he wanted to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria and ultimately even from Europe, and that he has been sabotaged on all those fronts. And then we also know that he has been belted with lawfare, with legal action, with impeachment proceedings, practically through his whole term. And here is where things get extremely interesting, because it was Russiagate, right? He has been dragged through impeachment proceedings over Russiagate. He was being accused of being Vladimir Putin's puppet, that his presidency was practically delegitimized by casting him as the Russian Manchurian candidate. And this weakened his presidency. It sabotaged his intention to improve the relations with Russia and roll back the United States imperial engagements around the world. And now we've seen just this month actually, Tulsi Gabbard come out and disclose a whole bunch of really important documents regarding the Russiagate affair. And it is already inevitable, it's already discernible, but it's inevitable that the trail of investigations will lead to London. And this week, we already had the head of the Government Accountability Institute, Schweitzer. Look, Trump is finally being tough and showing them who's the boss and so on. It's all nonsense. I don't think anything is going to come out of this. I would give more importance to the recent statement by Nikolai Patrushev, who was asked recently about the provocations in the Baltic region, because this NATO general, this absolute ridiculous failure of a NATO general, Donahue, was talking about, oh yeah, like we can push the Russians out of Kaliningrad, we can take control of Kaliningrad easily, quickly. Donahue has already proven his ability to fail with these cockamamie military operations, which he had a chance to prove himself in Ukraine, and he caused a complete and total disaster there. Anyway, Patrushev, go back to Patrushev because that's the point. Patrushev said that it's the British who are always behind these false flag attacks, and that they have centuries worth of experience in orchestrating false flag attacks exactly in order to pit powers one against the other so that they push them into war. And right now they are desperate to derail the relationship, a positive relationship between the United States and Russia. And so again, we have to ask ourselves, is Trump aware of that, or is he just blundering about, falling into every pitfall and buying into every provocation that is thrown his way? I personally don't think so. I think this is too dumb. Apart from that, there's his position, and his government's position has been consistent that the post-World War II global order is bad for the United States, that it's been weaponized against the United States, that the multipolar integrations are the new reality, and that the United States intends to embrace that new reality and work with other partners within a different geopolitical framework. Now, again, I have doubts whether Trump is even mentally capable of just being one among the peers, or whether he needs to be the top guy. And this is where I have a doubt. I don't have a doubt about whether he's just going back to where Barack Obama and Joe Biden and their cabinets left off. I don't think that's the case. And during our conversation, she told me two details that I thought were probably significant. This was in the late stages of the presidential elections. And she said that at the meeting they had at the Republican caucus, Trump actually explicitly invited the attendees to join him, and this is the words that she used, in a final battle against the global financier class. This is the words that she used, and according to her, this is exactly what Trump was saying to the attendees at this campaign event. And then another thing she told me was that during some of the recent meetings of his cabinet, he was making a point of referring to American geopolitical adversaries as our supposed enemies. And he was also saying the people that are perceived as our enemies. Words have meaning, and why he chose to use these words, we don't know, but he did. And there must be a reason for that. And then to invite his supporters to join him in a final battle against the global financier elite, you wouldn't come up with that if you didn't mean it, because nobody's asking for this. You could always talk against the Democrats. You could always say that Obama and Biden, they're communists and this and that, and they brought us into war. You wouldn't need to come up with the statement, final battle against global financier elites. That came out of Trump's mouth, allegedly. The European Union cannot provide advantage and protection to individual sovereign national European economies. That was the idea, to combine in a bloc. You are supposed to become stronger. You're supposed to have a bigger, more powerful negotiating position. And I think that Trump just demonstrated that this was all a children's tale. And he absolutely humiliated Ursula von der Leyen. I don't even know how he was able to pull this off. She agreed to something she cannot even deliver. You're right to point out they don't have the money to do this. This was absolutely staggering. I wonder how he coerced her to agree to $750 billion in energy resources over 3 years. This is several-fold what the EU is importing from the United States at the moment. What are they going to do with all this? And that's at very high prices. And then 600 billion euros worth of dollars worth of investments in the United States. That already eats up most of the Rearm Europe program. They've already spent it practically. That whole thing, we're going to spread money to European contractors, and we're going to grow European economy on the basis of rearmament push. They already spent this with Trump. And she agreed to something that she had no legitimate right to agree with, which strips the EU and its presidency and the European Commission of its legitimacy. One of them was the United States unilaterally walking out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which is one of the worst blunders that any leader could have made, because those are exactly the most dangerous weapons to the world peace. That was Donald Trump's first term. And now they are deploying nuclear missiles in Britain, which, okay, they're going to be under US control. It's not something that the British can, launch at their discretion. But still, it does put world peace at risk. What is his intent with this? Does he want to go and start a nuclear war? Again, that is so idiotic that I can't help thinking there must be another rationale for that. And I think that maybe that rationale will be to provide a pretext for nuclear disarmament talks. We'll find out, but I don't know. Anyway, I think that Trump is fighting a very tough fight. Whether he has just rolled over for the deep state and made himself their errand boy, we will only know in time. But I'm not convinced. I think that a lot of what Trump does amounts to deception. Not deception of the Russians or Chinese, but deception of his allies and his deep state, which basically wants him dead. And I know I had a few days ago, I had a podcast with Susan Kokinda of the Promethean Action in the United States, and she's very active in Michigan Republican Party. Remember, there was a war of words between him and Kim Jong-un, and there was a period of time where it seemed that the United States was going to go to war with North Korea, that they were going to bomb North Korea, but that didn't happen. Instead, at the very same time when he was engaged in that war of words, and it was usual Trump style, rash and vulgar and shooting nonsense off the hip through the social media. But at the same time, he said he sent a delegation of his representatives and military generals to South Korea and to China. to prepare the ground to meet with Kim Jong-un. And then they held that meeting, and they had a good meeting, and they had a great relationship, and he was the first U.S. president to set foot into the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And then we had the beginnings of peace emerge between the two Koreas. They started demining the demarcation lines. And so, with respect to today's circumstances, I suspect that we are now in that period of the war of words. Trump just went to Scotland, to Britain, right, where he met with Ursula von der Leyen and he met with Keir Starmer. And I think that some of his statements were meant for that audience, who said that the whole affair has been cooked up by British intelligence and by the CIA station in London, headed at the time by Gina Haspel, who was sent there by John Brennan. And so inevitably, the British hand in Russiagate will be uncovered and will be made public. And so this is extremely important because you had this special relationship between Britain and the United States, which has been cultivated for many decades, practically since World War I, but especially since the Harry Truman presidency. And it's been cultivated extremely extensively. And Donald Trump is very aware of that, because Donald Trump understands what happened with Russiagate and where it comes from. Practically every player in Russiagate, aside from the DNC leadership, was a British intelligence asset. And this is still a thing, because this year, this April, one of the main protagonists of Russiagate, Christopher Steele, the man who drew up the dossier against Donald Trump, he actually took Trump to court in London and obtained a judgment in the British court against Donald Trump. And so this was in April of this year, so Trump is president already. So Trump, according to this judgment, is meant to pay out some nearly £700,000 to Christopher Steele. So he knows, he understands, he's aware of all this. And then Christopher Steele is a big fish in the whole thing. Not to mention that in January of this year, and in the aftermath of the 100-year partnership agreement between Ukraine and the United Kingdom, that they've tried to bait Trump into providing a security guarantee for Ukraine with this really cheap, vulgar, rare earths resource hustle with Ukraine, where they caused Zelensky, the Brits basically prepared Zelensky to go to Washington and to offer Trump a $500 billion deal in Ukraine with these rare supposed mineral resources in order for him to provide a security guarantee to the Kiev government. It didn't work because he hasn't done it. He didn't give them the security guarantee. So that really does change the game. And I think it'll take time for us to really find out what Trump has up his sleeve. But I am quite convinced that things aren't what they seem. I don't think that Mrs. Kokinda would be lying about this. That would be very random. But I think that these statements have meaning, and I have to give Trump the benefit of the doubt that he actually means what he says. And then the implication is that he's taking on the most powerful people in the world. And how are you going to do that? They assassinated Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, JFK, RFK, MLK. They attempted they made two assassination attempts at Trump. You're going to have to wage that war by deception. And that deception has to be convincing, right? And to be convincing, you can't whisper to everybody, oh, hey, look, I'm gonna screw them over. Here's what I'm gonna do. You have to work basically like an undercover cop. Everybody has to assume that you're with the bad guys, that you're one of their key players. And that's the only way you're going to get to break the most important power nodes in those relationships. People often say that I give him too much credit. I don't know, because nobody knows. I'm just saying I have to consider this to be the case. because it's possible. And as far as we know, it's a 50-50 thing. Either I'm right or I'm wrong. But nobody knows, because obviously there's a great deal of obfuscation and deception going on. Most people are profoundly disappointed in Trump, and that the feeling that he has betrayed his voters and the MAGA base is widespread. But I'm not convinced that this is the reality of things, that nothing is what it seems. And so I would be very careful about judging Trump, because it is very hard for me to believe that he would now suddenly, after all this time of having a certain position and certain mission with his presidency, that he would suddenly pivot back to being the global hegemon and the enforcer of the global empire. I would be more open-minded with the idea that maybe, Trump being Trump, he's interested in putting the United States in the driver's seat of the global empire. Because let's face it, the British have been in the driver's seat. And now maybe he wants to take that position and impose himself as the dominant power in the world, and maybe dictate terms to Russia, China, Iran, India, and so forth. Or at the very least, approach all these negotiations and deals from the most powerful possible position. But the idea that he just went back to the same place where Joe Biden left off, that I don't believe. And so all this rhetoric might end up being what we got during his first term. It is too glib and shallow, and I think that these provocations are by now so obvious that I doubt that even Kaja Kallas would fall for it, let alone Donald Trump, who does have some intelligent and experienced people to advise him on all these things. And I think that at the moment, there is no question that Russia is winning the battle for Eurasia. They're winning the battle for control of Eastern Europe. And there's nothing the United States can do about this. The United States cannot reverse this. And so if you're looking at that situation, are you going to side with the loser, with the losers, not just Britain, but the whole EU and NATO? Or are you going to look to side with the winners and cut deals with them, because they are in the driver's seat now? So if you want to get a seat at the table, you need to make nice with Russia and with China. And Trump is trying to make nice with Russia and China, in spite of this, I'm disappointed in Vladimir Putin. I give him 50 days, I give him 10 days, I give him 12 days. I don't think any of this matters a whole lot at all. And when the 12 days expire, then what is he going to do? I think he must know that there's nothing he can do, actually. And then he's been imposing tariffs left and right, secondary tariffs against people who dare to trade with Russia. If it runs its course, it's going to collapse. And so you have the choice of, maybe we can push it over, collapse it deliberately, and create a level field for American manufacturers to compete. And so I think that this is something that Trump has stated explicitly, that this is his intention, and he's doing it. Only he's not doing it by saying we're closing the United States to free trade. He's using all these daily events in the geopolitical arena to give himself the pretext to do what he wants to do anyway. So even people who say, oh, look, there's these documents and there's these defense doctrines and blah, blah, that still is not conclusive. We simply do not know that's really the case. And not only is it absolutely correct, it is very obvious, which is exactly the reason why I think that Trump's positioning doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so then you come to the question, are these people completely stupid? Or are they playing a very different game from what they pretend to be playing? This is where my confusion comes from, because I see this as, this is so idiotic, they can't possibly mean this. Because if it's obvious to me, like how obvious is it going to be to Pentagon generals who have very detailed, precise information about what's going on? And like their Patriots and THAADs and all these things, they were the world's most advanced weapon systems back in the early 1990s. But now it's 35 years later, and they can't stop Iranian missiles. They can't stop Yemeni missiles. They can't stop Russian missiles. Never mind these swarms of drones that are being developed at a very rapid pace. So you can't possibly stay rigidly entrenched in a Cold War mentality, and you can't be aware that you actually have no leg to stand on. And it makes it very obvious because now every individual European country will get to say, no, we do not accept this. And France, there's been very heavy criticism of this in France, in Hungary, in Germany. And I think that no amount of PR is going to make this okay. So I think that this will prove the moment when the EU ship struck the iceberg, to use the Titanic analogy. And so I think this is the important aspect of this deal, not because this deal will actually hold. It probably won't, but it'll be the apple of discord, which might ultimately lead the European Union to tear itself apart. And it might also prove the end of NATO because, what now? NATO is going to be arming itself with US weapons, even though United States' commitment to NATO is on the wane. This, again, is so colossally idiotic. It can't possibly be what it seems at the surface. And what it is, Trump taking advantage of politically expedient pretexts to do what he wanted to do anyway, and that is impose tariffs on foreign trade. And the reason he's doing that is not to punish China, to punish India, to punish Russia. He's doing that because he wants to create protective barriers for American manufacturers. This is what he's been saying for a long time. He wants to bring industry and manufacturing back to the United States. How do you do that? You impose tariffs against imported goods. And so now, a lot of people are saying, oh, he's creating a disaster because the price for that won't be paid by China and India and so forth. Obviously, that's the case. The price will be paid by U.S. importers and by the U.S. consumer. Yes and no. The importers, Trump already wants out of the equation because he wants manufacturers instead of importers as the foundation of his economy. And then the U.S. consumer will very quickly have the choice of buying U.S. manufactured goods rather than imported goods. Now, this is going to cause inflation. Yes, that's true. But you're going to have inflation anyway. And it's not like this system of open free trade is sustainable. It's not sustainable anyhow. So preserving this doesn't make sense. To give his allies, quote unquote, the impression that he's still on board with them, that he still considers them important allies. Why is he doing that? I think not because he's interested in going to war against Iran or Russia or bringing the United States back into being the empire's enforcement force, but because I think he wants to negotiate advantageous deals for the United States. He wants to sell them a lot of U.S. weapons. And so you're not going to do that if you give them a clear, definitive signal that you're abandoning them and that you're no longer their ally. Because then they're going to turn inward. They're going to be starting to develop their own weapon systems, and they're no longer going to be as dependent on the United States as they are. At the moment, they still look at Trump as their daddy. They still want favors from him. They're still willing to twist themselves into a pretzel to get favor with Trump and with the United States. And so I think that he's exploiting this. And we've seen that he's been very effective at exploiting this in his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, who accepted a total and complete humiliation at Trump's hands. And so I think this is the game he's playing. And I think, unfortunately, Trump does blunder in important ways. Again, as we said, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the cancellation of the INF treaty in 2019, those were terrible, unforgivable mistakes. But anyway, the world goes on, and hopefully the Russians understand what's going on. And it seems that they do understand. The Chinese probably understand as well. And that there will be time when everybody will be sitting at the table, Trump with Putin, and with Xi Jinping. And a new security architecture for the world is going to be set up. What we have to avoid is a nuclear war. And we know that right now, the British are desperately trying to instigate a nuclear exchange somewhere, whether it's going to be Israelis, whether it's going to be Pakistanis, whether it's going to be the Russians, the Ukrainians, whoever, but they want a nuclear device to go off somewhere to cause complete chaos so they can hopefully emerge again as the reasonable ones, as the peacemakers, and then dictate the terms of peace and reimpose themselves as the leading power of the world.